Destiny. So, how did you get into being an EMT? Is it something you always wanted to do? Is it something you fell into?
So I always knew that I wanted to be somewhere in the medical field. I had originally started out, I started college at 16. So I had originally started out going into sports medicine. Decided it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So then I dabbled in nursing, got accepted into a nursing program. Then also kind of decided that wasn't exactly a really great fit for me. Um, I just didn't want to be stuck in a hospital all the time. I wasn't quite educated on all of the other nursing opportunities that there would be. So I ended up switching my major again. And then I just by chance actually met a group of medics when I was on campus and was like, oh my God, you guys are so cool. I want to do this. So I ended up transferring into their EMT program because to be a medic, you have to be an EMT for at least 1 year before they will even attempt to do anything with the medic field. And so I started that. I actually had to pause because at the time I was a freshly single mom. I was 19 years old. I didn't really have a whole lot of options. Resources were so limited. So I had to drop out of school and I started working full time for a job that I hated. I hated getting up and going to work every day. It was the most miserable I've ever been. And so then I actually got a job offer with the company that I'm now currently at. They had a contract with my state that allowed them to have what's called EMR, emergency response drivers. So you would be in charge of driving the ambulance and you would be on with either a paramedic or an EMT as well. And they would be doing all the medical care, but you would be the driver. And so I'm like, well, this is a great way to get my foot in the door. I needed to change something because I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. And then eventually, after being there for about 6 months, the company offered me to go through their academy that they had to get my EMT certification, and I ended up doing that. It was so hard. I had to drive about 2.5 hours every single day for school. I was
All
spending
while having a little one, right? All while being
Right.
a mother, right?
Yeah.
That's difficult.
It was the hardest thing I think I've ever done, but it was so immensely worth it because I would not trade my job for anything. I absolutely love
that.
what I do.
I
So,
love that because
go ahead.
it's important to love what you're doing because you could be more passionate about it, right, Kyle?
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, that's what makes the workday go quick and makes it so you actually want to go and can do your best when you're at work. How was it like going from, driving a car or whatever to driving an ambulance? That
Right.
So I actually grew up driving larger vehicles. For the longest time, I was driving an '04 Ford pickup with a 10-inch lift on it. So it honestly wasn't that hard. I also grew up riding horses and doing a lot of livestock stuff. So I had been hauling trailers. I had done all of that. So it was a pretty easy switch over, honestly. And all of our ambulances have backup cameras, which I never had before. So it made it a million times easier.
That's a blessing. That's a
Heck
blessing
yeah.
right there, right? Technology.
Oh, for sure.
How is it whenever you have like a patient in the back and they're needing medical care and all types of stuff? Is it hard to like keep steady? I imagine you have to try and keep steady for some of it.
Oh, for sure. We have two kinds of rigs. We have what's basically like a transport van, so it's a lot smaller. And it's a little bit easier to kind of maneuver because there's not so much empty space to be thrown around in. You can kind of brace yourself against stuff.
Sure.
And then we have the big rigs, which are like the typical box rig ambulances that you see. Those have terrible suspension. You will bounce around all day. You hit a pothole and you think you ran over a mountain.
Wow.
So it can definitely be a lot more challenging than I think people really would think because they're like, oh, it's an ambulance. They have to do medical stuff in the back. It's smooth. It's not. It's not.
Now, are the majority of people in that profession male or is it a mixture?
I would say it's a pretty male-dominated industry.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, if I mean, my company has quite a bit of diversity, I would say, but for the base that I'm at, I am actually the only female that's there.
Wow.
Wow.
So it's one of our smaller bases that we have. There's only 4 or 5 rigs that run out of it, but I am the only female that's on that shift.
Now, is there a difference in equipment in some of those rigs? Like, do some of them have different life-saving equipment than other ones would?
We have 2 classifications. One's called BLS, which stands for Basic Life Support, and then ALS, which is Advanced Life Support. And ALS is for the more critical patients that are needing higher level care. Those are the ones that we have paramedics and nurses on. Just because EMTs, our scope of practice is limited. We can't do everything. We don't know everything. We didn't go through all the schooling that paramedics and nurses did. So that one has a lot more medical equipment, I guess. Those are always the bigger rigs. They always have more stuff. They have more resources, and you always have someone who has that higher level of education. And then BLS, basic life support, we respond to obviously life-altering events, but it is more of it's just 2 EMTs that are on the rig, and you don't necessarily have the scope of practice to respond to everything that the ALS rigs do.
So an ALS rig would end up going out to like a really bad car wreck maybe, and then BLS would go to what, like someone maybe having like a bad laceration or something on their arm at home?
Yeah, so I mean, both can be responding to a car accident, a pretty bad car accident. We've all been trained to respond to those, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to transport them to the hospital. We would have to wait for a minute. So we know how to treat stuff, we're just not allowed to transport.
How was it learning all this stuff too? Because I feel like to get into this realm of it, whenever you're going into like nursing and all that, there's a lot of schooling, obviously, and a lot of training. I feel like EMT wise, it's more let's throw you into the fire and that's how you learn. So how was it getting used to all that?
So I was actually really lucky because as a driver, I had been kind of thrown in, but like into the shallow end. So I always had another EMT that I could bounce ideas off. I learned from a lot of people. I got to work with a bunch of different nurses and medics and kind of got to feel around and figure stuff out without having to be medically responsible for someone. So that helped a lot. But then after I got out of academy, they just threw us right into the deep end. And a lot of the people that I had gone to academy with, they had never done anything medically in their life. That one person I worked with was a warehouse manager. And we actually got thrown on to the same shift together. And she's like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I'm like, don't worry, I've been doing this for a while. We got it.
Wow. So you can end up in a pretty serious like situation where you got to take care of somebody, and I'm guessing there's like someone else in there too that's been doing it for a while. They don't just throw 2 newbies out and be like, good luck.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had what we call FTO shifts, which is field training shifts. And it basically allows you to ride around with 2 other EMTs that are pretty experienced. So you get a feel for what it's going to look like. But I believe my partner got 2 of them, 2 FTO shifts, and then we were put onto a rig together.
Wow.
So you know what you know from school, but it's totally different once you're thrown into the fire and it's an actual real life situation and not just a simulation.
Were you ever taken back? Like, were you ever in a situation where you're like, oh my God, I either make this choice or that, like, and you just trust your gut, right? When you're in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like every EMT has been in that position at least once, if not more than that. But you really have to, the way that I think about it is I'm like, okay, well, I could do X, Y, or Z, and it could result in either X, Y, or Z results. And so you kind of have to just fall back on your knowledge. And that's the one thing about being an EMT or anywhere in the EMS field is you're constantly learning. Things are constantly changing. You're constantly doing training. You're keeping up on your skills. There's just so many different other things that go into being an EMT. It's just not the initial schooling. It's like schooling and then more schooling,
Plus,
and more schooling, and then more schooling.
I bet being a mother helps you tremendously with that job as well. Because
Mhm.
once you're a parent, you're always thinking like that catastrophic way of thinking and trying to problem solve,
Oh,
Yep.
definitely. It
right?
gave me such an I guess more a
Confidence,
realistic outlook on everything too as well. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You mentioned school was hard too, like going through the actual academy and everything. What do you do when you're in the academy? Like first day you get in there and is it just a whole bunch of tests or they start throwing you into all the real world situations that you may run into?
So, since I went to two different programs, the original program that I went to was about 4 months. I was there for about three. So I didn't complete it, so I can't really speak to how the whole entire program went. But basically, you come in, it's very rigid. My husband's military, and I was telling him some of the things. He's like, oh my God, military doesn't even take it to that extent. It's
Well,
very, you respect your higher ups, you follow the chain of command. Um, and so when you go in, it's good morning, sir. How are you doing? You sit down, you open up your book to whatever class you're in. And so for me, the academy that I went through that I finished ended up being 3 weeks. So it
Okay.
was a very rushed program. So we sat down, we opened up our books, we did whatever lecture was going to be there for the morning, and then you get thrown into all of the practicals where you're doing your hands-on skills. And so it we were doing about 8 chapters a day, I believe.
so
Having
you're learning a lot, and like they're cramming a lot of
Mhm.
information in a short amount of time.
Yeah, yeah, it's I would I those 3 weeks were probably the most stressed I've
I'm
ever been in my
sure.
life. It was so much.
Is
And all this while you had a little one. How old was your little one while you were learning all this?
He was two.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot. I
Yeah.
give you credit.
that's a hard age for
Right?
like
That's
you're already exhausted from
right.
kids.
2 years old, forget about it. Oh,
Yeah. So thankfully, I had family who watched him during the day when I was at school, and then I would
that's a
pick him up on
blessing.
my way home. I wouldn't even get back over to where I live until like 7 or 8, depending on how traffic was. And then would make dinner, get him ready for bed, put him to bed, and then I would sit up until probably like 1 or 2 in the morning hitting the book,
Studying, right.
and then do it all over again and wake up at 4:30 in the morning and go back and do it
Super
all over.
mom,
Oh,
super woman.
it's crazy.
It
Well,
is
and
crazy.
even now, you mentioned that like you had just got done from a long shift whenever we were texting and stuff. Is that hard just family wise, just taking care of your kids and trying to have a social life and stuff?
Right.
So yes and no. Right now it is hard because my husband is actually gone for 2 months in training. So I don't have that other parent to help balance things out.
It's
Right.
harder.
But when he is here, he's amazing. He does pretty much everything until I get home from work. And then he's like, you go to sleep and I'll go bring the kids over to the park and go do other stuff and whatever. Um, but thankfully, when I work 24-hour shifts, I only work 2 days a week. And then when I work my 12-hour shifts, I work 3 to 4 days a week. So I do have off time to get stuff done. But I think that was one of the bigger appeals for having the larger shifts is I'm like, oh, I get to be home with my kids more.
That's
Right.
that's my thing for that because I would prefer it 14, 16 hour shift, do that like 3 days in a row, and then I actually get 4 days off because I'm used to working like 6, 7 days a week usually. So
Yeah, I was working that before this, and I'm like, I'm never going back to those shifts. You could not pay me enough money in the world to go back and work like 5, 6, 7 days a week. Absolutely not.
what made you start all this? Because you got into it in the middle of COVID, correct?
That's when I originally started going to school, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was an EMT and a driver during probably like the end period of COVID.
Did you just you knew that, nurses and everything were kind of a hot commodity and everyone was looking and hiring, so you decided, heck yeah, I'll try it, or
Yeah, I mean, um, I knew that I didn't want to be stuck in one place, just working out of one place all day. I wanted to be out and about. I wanted to go be in the middle of everything. I wanted to be in the chaos. Um,
Right.
and it just happened that I finished up school right when COVID happened, and it worked out pretty nicely. It was really rough for a while. Some of the coworkers that I originally went in with didn't last longer than a couple months just because it's such a high stress environment already, and then you add all of the COVID precautions and everything else that you're seeing
And
on.
how was that as a mother? Were you fearful and extra cautious knowing that you were putting yourself into a situation?
Yeah, I mean, there was I I always try to bring a trash bag and an extra pair of clothes, and so then I'm not bringing all of those germs and
Right.
stuff into my house. But there was a couple times where I didn't realize that I didn't replace my extra clothes set in my car, and I went and picked up my kid in my boxers and slippers and a
Right.
t-shirt. Just because I never wanted to expose my son to any of that, just because he already has asthma, he's already a higher risk kid, and that just absolutely terrified me thinking about getting him sick.
yeah.
So
Right.
lots and lots of spray downs before I went to go pick up my son. We have this stuff called Sani spray. Basically, like it's not supposed to be on your skin because it can cause cancer. But I would spray down my whole uniform with it before I put it in my car, and
Well, and I get that because, like, I do pest control and I'm going into people's houses, like a bunch of different people every single day. And it's not like that quick interaction at the grocery store. I've been there for a good amount of time. So if anyone is sick or anything's going on, I'm bringing that back. So
Right.
I mean, we worked all through COVID. So it was a strange time.
oh yeah, for sure.
Do you guys have a lot of turnover because it is a high stress job? I could see you guys having the people that
Right.
are there and lifers, and then those couple of people that just always rotate out.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been with my company for a year and a half, and I have seen so many people come and go. I am actually one of the longer EMTs that has been there. And I mean, there are a lot of four lifers, and most of those tend to be medics or EMTs that become medics. Those are the people that usually tend to stay around, but we pull a lot of high schoolers, like straight out of high school,
I
18,
like
19.
that.
And this is their first like big boy job. And I think that's probably the biggest turnover that I see is the kids that come straight out of school and they're like, oh, this is so cool, blah, 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 and don't really think about, oh my God, this is a stressful environment. I'm going to be stressed
Right.
out. I'm going to be thrown into situations that are awful.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the highest turnover that I see is people who just get into EMT because they think, oh, it's a cool job.
Do you ever carry a lot of that weight home with you? Like when you see like when you're come up on something that is triggering to you potentially?
Yes and no. I see a lot of stuff that people are not
Right.
meant to see.
Sure.
Um, and it definitely does kind of mess with your head a little bit, especially like when it's involving something that's very similar to what your family's like. Like I hate
Right.
taking pediatric patients. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And it's not because I don't like kids. I love kids, but I just seeing that kid, it's like, oh my God, as a mom, that could be my kid right there.
It's too personal.
Way too personal, way too
Right.
close to home. So I've gotten really good at separating work and home life.
Good.
You go to work, you leave all of the stuff that happened at home, and when you come home from work, you leave all of the work stuff in the car. You
Right.
don't, you, I honestly listen to really loud music on my way home if I've had a bad day.
Yep.
It's just a way of decompressing and being like, okay, I can't bring this into my home because it's not good for my family. It's not going to be good for me. It's going to ruin the time that I have with my kids. So I just need to shove it way back there.
So do you talk to your husband about it at all, or do you like go to counseling or anything like that?
Um, Since my husband is military, he kind of gets it. He's seen a lot of
Right.
pretty messed up things as well. So it's a little bit easier for us to talk to each other about the stuff that we see and what happened and what's going on, just because we kind of both have that understanding of like, it does mess with your head. It
Right.
hurts. It's not pretty whatsoever, but it's also kind of like, hey, it's a job, it's not our life. So we need to kind of be able to move past it and not have it affect every aspect.
Now, a lot of that you learned on your own, correct? Because they don't really teach you how to do that in school.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the first shifts that I ever worked was with this medic, and his name was Taylor, and he was probably the coolest guy I've ever met. I want to be just like him. But he was like, "Oh, so you're new to this?" I'm like, "Yeah, pretty new." And he's like, "Do you have a messed up childhood?" I'm like, "Yeah, you could say that." He's like, "Do you have childhood trauma?" He's like, "I'm like, yeah, I mean, definitely."
Right.
He's like, "Has your life been messed up? Has anything bad happened to you?" I'm like, "Yep." He's like, "Oh, you're gonna be just fine."
So reassuring, right? And I
Yeah.
was going to ask you that because I know that you said that, like, about chaos, like you love the chaos of the job. Does it remind you of your childhood growing up?
Um, I think yes and no. I feel like I definitely learned how to thrive in chaos just because
Right.
either you thrive or you don't thrive. And if I had to pick one or the other, I'm gonna make it work for me rather than against me. And
Good for
so
you.
now I've just kind of turned into a little bit of a chaos junkie.
That's okay.
It's better than other things, you know? I
Yes.
mean, it keeps me on my toes. I like having a fast-paced environment. I like being in the middle of everything. And so this job is just the perfect fit. It feeds everything that I need it to feed.
Do you chase that adrenaline in your off time? Like, do you do anything now to get that same feeling?
Definitely. I mean, I ride horses, I did rodeo, dirt bikes, I go hunting, I own guns, like all of that is just trying to reach that next little thrill
Yeah, yeah.
without being damaging to myself.
I love that
That
in a
is
healthy
that's the
way.
important part. Yeah.
Right.
What does it take to maintain everything in your rig?
We start out shift, every single shift is we do a rig check. And so basically that's where we have a list on our work phones where we just go by and open up every single cabinet, double check that we have all of our inventory. You double check the batteries, you check our pumps, you check the defibrillator. You basically have to double check every single thing on the rig. Make sure the lights work, make sure the siren works, make sure our turning signals work, make sure that the back has heat because some of our rigs are really old and they don't always have heat that works. Um, so you just have to go step by step by step, and it takes about 20 minutes to go through a whole entire rig and make sure that you have everything that you need. But it's also the off-coming crew's job to make sure that they tell you if they used anything and that it needs to be restocked.
And is it the entire crew's responsibility, or like whenever you were driving, was it more on you?
So it's everyone's responsibility because if something happens and you don't have what you need, it's going to be on everyone. And personally, as an EMT, I prefer to do it myself and double check everything because I've worked with a bunch of different partners and some of them are more competent than others. Some of them are really new and they don't know what stuff looks like.
Right.
So I like to go and do it myself, just bit by bit by bit. I've worked with nurses and medics that let the EMTs do the rig check and they do the the medicine check. So all of our narcos and everything like that is their responsibility because I don't have the clearance to do that. But a lot of the people that I've worked with are very meticulous about it. So it's never a gray area on if you're going to have what you need or not.
So where do the meds get filled up? Like if you need to fill up on certain medications, where do you guys go?
So we have what's called bases, and then we have what's called hubs. So bases are basically just like little outfitted buildings that have rooms for people to sleep in. It has a kitchenette, it has a TV, recliners, that kind of thing. But our hubs are the ones that have all of our supplies. And so if we need to re-up on something that our base doesn't have, then we go over to the hub, and that also includes all of our medications. So epinephrine, any of our painkillers, anything like that that needs to be signed out to a nurse or a medic has to be signed out by one of our MSOs, who's basically like our shift manager.
Is there any issues with, because it's kind of been controlled a lot lately, whenever it comes to distributing pain meds to patients and stuff like that, do you have to like watch what you give somebody and be super cautious with that? Or is it you do whatever you have to do in the situation and justify it later?
So paramedics and nurses are the only ones who are allowed to give pain medication. Just because it is a controlled substance, you have to have schooling and licensing behind it. EMTs don't hold that licensing. So in the moment, it's whatever they deem necessary. As long as you can justify it when you get to the hospital, then you're good. But when it comes to wasting, which is basically where if you open up a vial, you can't reuse it again, it's contaminated, so we have to waste it. So that has to be witnessed by either the other EMT or another medical personnel to show that it was actually wasted and it wasn't stolen or not used incorrectly or anything like that. So they're very, very picky about it, and people can lose their license for not wasting correctly and not having someone witness it.
So after you go out on like a call, is that something you do have to do? Like you get done with everything at that call and you have to fill out a bunch of paperwork, like explaining what happened?
Yeah, so for a basic report, you type in all the information. You went from point A to point B. This is the person's name. This is their information. This is their insurance, medications that they're on, pertinent medical history, all that. And then you have what's called a narrative, where you basically, from kind of like almost a third party point of view, you explain to what happened start to end. And you basically have to be very, very detailed in it, because if it gets called to court for whatever reason, you have to be able to justify every single thing that you did. You have to be able to be like, oh, yep, that happened, that happened, that happened. I documented it.
Now, do you get called to court a lot? Have you been subpoenaed?
So I have not, but I do know people that have, specifically a lot of EMTs and paramedics that work in a big city that's near me. The drug problem is out of hand, to say the least. Crime rates through the roof, all of that. And people will do anything to get out of having to pay for the ride, having to pay for the medical care, trying to sue us. And so basically what happens is pretty much if you work in that city, you're guaranteed to be subpoenaed at least once or twice during your career, probably more often than not.
Right.
So
they see a lot of chaos.
Exactly. So you always have to make sure that you're documenting to the point of if you get subpoenaed, you can justify everything that you did, and everything that you did is on paper.
Does that worry you sometimes? Like if there is one that's, I guess not like you did something wrong, but there was a decision you had to make that was kind of, it could go either way. Do you get worried that you're gonna end up paying for it in the long run?
Sometimes, yeah, because as much as I hate to say it, the company that I work for thinks in dollar signs and not in backing up their employees. And there has been situations that I've been put in where I was not in the wrong, but the company is more worried about keeping the people happy rather than backing up their employees for being correct. And it's unfortunate, but that's kind of just the way private EMS works, is you take it to the chin and you suck it up and you say, okay, well, here it is.
That's most any job, because at the end of the day, without the money, they can't keep running. So it makes sense in some ways, I guess. Have you been seeing, since it is more of like a crime related area, do you see a lot of gunshots? Do you see a lot of ODs? Do you see, like, what's the crazy stuff that you deal with? Again, I have to mention Betty as our sponsor. She is a life coach. She is absolutely amazing, and she does recovery life coaching. She does career life coaching. She does couples life coaching, all types of stuff. But if you text her your name and PodTox, just the name PodTox, you will get your very first session with her for free, and it should be about an hour session. And yeah, you guys can figure out what you need, but you can use her for a ton of different things. She does some great work, and she's really looking for some more patients right now.
And the best thing about life coaching is it's taking your life from where you're at now and looking forward. Therapy is taking your life from where you're at now and working backwards. So that's a lot of times people get that, mixed up a little bit, but it's an excellent resource.
Most of it being ODs, just
Right.
because the area that I personally work in has a very, very high drug rate, and it's gone out of control, especially in the past 5 years. Fentanyl is being mixed with xylazine to create tranq. People don't know that they're doing tranq. They think that it's just fentanyl. It's causing a lot of issues, to say the least, and it's honestly just really sad.
Right. And wounds, different
Yeah,
wounds on people. And
I think the grossest thing that I've seen that has been drug related is this guy's leg basically just rotting off because he was injecting xylazine mixed with fentanyl. And that's a vasoconstrictor, which means that it constricts your blood vessels. So you don't get all of the oxygen and blood to that part where you inject. It pretty much just kills off the skin.
Yep.
And so just watching that and knowing that this person is stuck in a loop and they can't get themselves out and they're continuing to be stuck in it, and now they're probably going to have to lose their leg and be even more stuck in a hole because they're already living on the streets, they're already addicted to drugs, and now they're going to have a major surgery where they're going to lose a limb and then just be put right back on the street again and have no support services after that.
and addiction, is that something personal to your life, like growing up?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Both of my parents were addicts. I guess you could consider me an addict during my teenage years. Was not being safe, was not being smart, didn't really take into account that my genetics play a lot into it and that I have the
Right.
addiction gene. And so when all of my friends were experimenting and doing stuff and whatever, I was like, oh, I can just quit like they did. But I couldn't. And so I dug myself really, really deep into a hole for a while. And it was very unfortunate. But I was able to pull myself out. And I'm thankful
Good for
every
you.
single day that I did that, because I look back and I'm like, I see some of my friends that I went to school with, the ones that are still alive at least. And I'm like, man, that could have been me
Right.
so easily, so easily.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't realize how quickly things can kind of go south. Even in like high school, you're partying, you're hanging out with your friends. Everything's like this is normal being a high school kid. And then all of a sudden you're like drinking or doing whatever at home by yourself. And it gets pretty serious pretty fast.
Very
And
fast.
like we were never told, like if you're predisposed to these genes, that like that could happen to you. Like the education was never there years ago
No, it
at
really
all.
wasn't. And I think that that is the reason that a lot of people get so trapped in it, because they're like, oh, all of my friends are doing it, but they can quit
Right.
whenever they want, so I can quit whenever I want. And then next thing you know is you're a couple months down the line and all you can think about is, how am I going to get high? How am I going to get drunk? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? Oh, I need to find my next fix and I need to do it now before I get sick. And it's so sad knowing that I wasted a lot of my teenage years doing that.
What was that turnaround moment though for you? Like what made you realize that you were going down a road that could potentially lead you to where your parents were in life?
Well, there was two big things. One of it was a friend of mine died due to OD, and he was the best person you could have ever met. That man was the sunshine for everyone. And you would have never known looking at him that he was an addict. And that was one of the things that just kind of blew everyone's mind because they didn't really know that he was.
Right.
But he sadly passed away because he OD'd while he was driving and crashed his car and killed himself.
Wow.
And
I'm sorry.
so that was one of the things I'm like, shit, I need to get myself together. Like, I can't end like this because that could have been me so easily. And so then another one was my little brother. He got the really short end of the stick when it came to all of us siblings, is he was stuck with our birth mom for the longest. And she got him hooked onto methamphetamine. And it was awful. And watching him spiral and just keep going down, 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 I'm like, I have to pull it together, because if I can't pull myself together, I can't help him pull it together.
So what gave you the strength to do it? Did you just stop? Like,
I kind of just went cold turkey. I didn't really have any other options, because at the time, my adoptive mom didn't know that I was using. She didn't know anything, and I think it was mostly blissful ignorance, just because she had never grown up around any of that. She didn't know what that stuff looked like. She just thought I was being a moody teenager. So I ended up locking myself in my room for, God, I think it was all of spring break pretty much, and just had to sweat it out.
How old were you when you got adopted?
I was almost 4 years old when I got adopted.
And can you explain a little backstory to that?
Yeah, so when I was about 5 months old, I was left at the police station, and was picked up by CPS and put into the foster system. Because my caseworker was so terrible, they didn't know what my name was. All they could figure out was my middle name, which was Destiny. And so that's how I got my name. And so I spent a couple years in foster care. I tried doing visits with my mother. It took about 3 years for them to establish paternity with my father. And then it basically took my mom taking off and leaving and then ignoring all social work and then disappearing, basically, for them to be like, okay, we're just going to terminate rights. We're going to move on, and we're going to let her be up for adoption.
Wow.
And did you say your brother was still like stuck with your birth mom?
Mm-hmm.
Why did he get stuck and everybody else was?
So it's a super complicated family dynamic, but essentially his dad ended up marrying our aunt, so my mother's sister.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, got that.
And so they got married, and it took, I want to say, about 4 years for him and my aunt to fight for custody, and ended up getting custody. But at that point, our mother had already dug her nails in and kind of created this very toxic trauma bond. Yep. And so as soon as he started getting old enough, he was running away to go stay with our mom. He wanted to go be with her because she convinced him that she was the only person in the world who was ever going to love him like that. And so he kept going back, kept going back, kept going back. And by the time he was 11, she had him addicted to meth.
How many children did your mother have, like your biological mother?
She's had 4 pregnancies that have resulted in children. But as far as I know, she's had like 7, 8, 9 pregnancies total.
And since you guys were in the foster system and everything, were you all kept together for the most part, or did you get split up sometimes, or?
So I was actually the only one who was put into the foster system. I'm the oldest. I was born when my mom was 15. I was the only one. Family members didn't want to take me in, mostly because they were so caught up in their own lives. It was a really hectic time for my birth family. A lot of stuff was hitting the fan. So no one just had the time or the effort or the patience or whatever. They were mad at my mom. So I was put into foster care. My little brother, Bobby, he's 16 now. He goes back and forth between our grandma's house, and then he goes and sees his dad on breaks. His dad is great. He's very involved. He's a great person. He probably has the best dad out of all of us, to be completely honest. And then my brother Riley, who is 19, he was placed with his dad and our aunt, but then kind of bounced back and forth, would run away all the time. But he's finally on his feet now. He's doing really well for himself. He's sober, he's clean. And then now my little sister, who is placed with me, we're working on adoption. She is still technically a ward of the state because she's in foster care. Tracking down our mom to get all of that stuff situated has been so difficult.
I want to know about your husband because, like, that takes a very strong man and a very loving man to say, you know what? Yeah, let's take in your sister. And
Yeah.
that's a lot right there. How did he feel? Was that?
So my grandma is convinced that either he is the best person in the world or he's just
He has
absolutely
to
crazy.
be. He has to be one or the other. One or the other.
But he's amazing. He had a chaotic childhood himself.
So he's compassionate and empathetic. He understands.
Yeah, the first time that we found out about my sister, I found out that my mom was at a hospital because she had just had an emergency C-section. I'm like, I'm going to go see her. I'm going to go see if she'll just sign rights over to me right now. We all know that she's not going to take care of this baby, so let's just try and get ahead of it.
Right.
And he came with me, and that was probably the worst state that I've seen my mother in a very long time. She was so deep into her own psychosis, she couldn't even remember what she named the baby. She gave us like 6 different names.
Wow.
She was tweaking out, honestly. She was going through withdrawals really badly because she hadn't been able to use for the 2 days that she was in the hospital. Right. She was so discombobulated. And when we walked out, I'm just fuming. I'm so mad. I'm so angry. I wanted to drag her out of the hospital right then and there.
Right.
But my husband looks at me and he's like, man, I knew that your childhood was bad, but I didn't realize that it was that level of bad. And that makes me respect you so much more because now I see what a strong, independent person you've become.
Wow.
And you came from that. And that takes some balls to come back.
It does.
And so ever since then, that's been his baby.
You're breaking those cycles, and I love that. That does take 2 strong people.
And I wouldn't be able to do it without my husband. I would have never been in the position to be able to take on another kid by myself. He is the sole reason that I have made it this far. He is my biggest cheerleader. He's
I love that for you. You deserve that, though.
And I think it's huge for you guys just because you both, because of your careers and everything you've gone through, you have a lot of discipline, obviously. Mm-hmm. So taking on a kid is something that's more manageable for you.
We make jokes because we ended up having to get married pretty fast. He had proposed to me, I want to say like 3 weeks after we found out about my sister. And then we ended up getting married about 3 weeks after that. We ended up eloping because our foster licensing place didn't want to license us if we weren't married.
Wow.
So we were always planning on getting married. That was always the end game. That was not like, oh, we're just doing this because baby.
Right.
But we always make jokes because we're like, oh, man, like 8 months ago, we were both single. We were
right.
doing whatever we wanted. And now here we are. We have a whole family. We're living in a brand new house that we got. What? It's crazy how fast everything went, but how perfectly everything fell together.
Now, how old is your sister now?
She will be 5 months at the beginning of next month, so a couple weeks.
Now, are you planning on, like, that's your child, like how, when she gets old, like what, or you're going to just wing it?
So we're always going to be open about who we are to her. I'm never going to be like, "Oh, I'm your mommy. I'm only your mommy," because
Right.
I don't think that's fair. That's not giving her all the information. And if she's going to succeed in life, she needs to have the whole picture. So we're always going to be open and honest, be like, "Hey, me and Sean are actually sister and brother-in-law, but if you want to call us mom and dad, that's totally fine. If you want to call us Sean and Destiny, that's totally fine. If you have another nickname or something that you want to call us, that's perfectly fine. But we will always love you like you're our kid because
I
you
love
are our kid.
that.
It doesn't matter, sister, brother, cousin, whatever. Any kid that's around me, they're my child. I will always treat them.
So you got her when she was a newborn. I'm reading the comments.
Mhm.
People are asking. Newborn, fresh.
Yeah, so she was in the NICU for about a month,
Okay.
detoxing, and she was 10 weeks early, so she was 30 weeks gestational, which is small. She was born
Was
at
your mother on any MAT medications during her pregnancy, or was it all
she had no one even knew she was pregnant. I don't even think
wow?
that she knew she was
Wow.
pregnant. That baby was being fed purely drugs, and the fact that she has thrived to this point blows my mind because she is the happiest, healthiest baby I think I've ever seen.
Was that something you feared a little bit, taking on a baby that had been going through those struggles? Because that can be a lot trying to take over something like that because the lasting effects can be pretty intense.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it crosses my mind every single day. My adoptive mother has adopted two other my sisters, not biologically related or anything, but my youngest sister was born with methamphetamine in her system, and it caused a lot of issues. She has been in occupational therapy. She had to go to feeding therapy. She was in all the special ed classes. She had to have IEPs from the moment that she could go to school. She got kicked out of a school because they couldn't understand how her brain worked. She ended up having a
Right.
service dog. She is very high functioning and she's a very intelligent person that never ever has docked anything like that. But the way that her brain works is just different. And
Right.
when you are affected at such a young age by drugs like that, it affects the part in the brain called the limbic system, which does emotional control, impulse control, regulation. It causes a lot of issues. And I myself was also a drug impacted baby. And I was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, where everything overstimulates me. I can't wear certain textures. I
I'm
can't.
the same way where everything, certain noises,
Mhm.
like when I'm already escalated and then I hear repetitive noises, it's like too much.
Exactly. And so thankfully now they have a lot of resources that they didn't even have 10 years ago.
What
Um,
helps you the best with that? What helps you to cope the best with that?
they have a weighted
Yeah.
blanket. And
Really?
I just sometimes need to go sit on the floor in the bathroom by myself and not have anyone talk to me. Deep pressure always helps. Yeah, it's just you have to find different things to help. Everyone's different.
Coping mechanisms.
Has that affected you at all for your career?
Um, I wouldn't say so. I think it kind of gives me a little bit more empathy to people who also have those same issues. I have found really great coping mechanisms, and I'm also really, really good at just like switching off that side of my brain when I'm in an emergent situation. Where I'm like, okay, I can be overstimulated, but I'm gonna have to deal with it after this call is done because I
Right.
don't have time to be freaking out about this texture is touching me, the loud noises, I don't have time for that. So
When you get overstimulated like that, you have to try to prioritize at that point, like what is the most important in this moment.
yeah,
Right.
I actually talked to a therapist about that, and they said that it is a response to trauma. It's a trauma response. Being able to prioritize things when you feel like you're crawling out of your skin, it's a trauma response, and I'm honestly so glad for it because I don't think I would be able to do my job without it.
Right.
See, sometimes those things that you think are negative are actually a positive in your life.
Absolutely.
And that's one of them.
So being in the foster system and everything, what What was the most challenging part of that?
Feeling like you don't really belong anywhere because the places that you're staying aren't your home. They're someone else's
Right.
home. You have a home, but it's not this home, and you're not allowed to go back to your home. Um, the people that you're with aren't your family, they're your foster family, and some people are a lot more vocal about that than others. Some people will be like, if you want to call me mom, that's cool. Other people will be like, no, you need to call me Mrs. Johnson. It varies, and unfortunately, the state that I live in has made the regulations so difficult for people to keep foster licenses or even get them in the first place that so many people don't want to do it. And so it's leaving a lot of the people with the ill intentions there because they have something to gain, which is the financial gain from it. You're completely
You probably
right.
feel like you're living like out of a bag
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
because whatever's in that little suitcase is what you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've
Sad.
had a couple friends who aged out of the system. Um, and there were one friend in particular, he was in 26 homes in the 12 years that he was in foster care. And
Wow.
he told me how multiple times the caseworker would just show up and pick him up and then not bring him back. He was never given a reason why. He never was told where he was going. He never was given a heads up. It was just, okay, grab your bag, let's go.
That's horrible because that causes like that, like trauma of like,
Yeah,
that's scary.
it
It's
really is.
horrible.
It messes with your ability to settle down. It took me a
Right.
very long time to get to the point after I became an adult when I moved out and I got my own place of being able to decorate my house because I was like so stuck in the idea of like, oh, I'm gonna move, I can move again. I don't want to set up any permanence here.
How many homes were you in?
Ooh. I'm honestly not sure, to be completely honest, because there was a couple times where I was bounced a little bit before I was placed with my now adoptive mom. But the record keeping was really terrible. So I'm not actually sure. I would probably have to go look through all of my folders to find, but I wouldn't say more than like 4 or 5. And it was
Okay.
all when I was pretty young. So thankfully that aspect didn't affect me too much in the moment. It was more of like the prolonged issues of being like, okay, as a child, I never got to attach to anyone. I never got to have that bonding with someone. And that was the part that really got me.
You're always living in fight or flight mode.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that opportunity to just decompress because
Yeah.
you never know if you're coming or going.
Mm-hmm. And finally, now as an adult that I'm married, I'm in a stable relationship, I have a stable place to live, I've been able to kind of pull back on that and not be in fight or flight mode.
Good.
And I remember sitting in bed the other day, I'm like, I'm not worried about having to move. I'm
See?
not worried about having to go somewhere and not have what I need. I'm not worried about my kid being somewhere that's not safe. I'm not worried about me being somewhere that's not safe.
Do you feel like some of like how fast you and your husband had to move, do you feel like that, I don't know, made you more comfortable, if that makes sense? Just because you didn't have to like sit in it for so long? I don't know. I don't know if that came out right.
No, I get what you're trying to say. I think the fact that he was willing to just go full in with someone that he had been with for 6 months,
Right.
that's crazy to me. Like he was just, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna take care of this. We're gonna do everything, and we got this.
Was there any backlash from his family?
I mean, not that I know of.
But that's good though, because it
Yeah,
shows that that shows that you guys have support. And
yeah.
support goes a long way. That's needed, especially, bringing on another child into the family.
Yeah, I think that his family thinks that he's a little bit crazy from being
Hey,
single soldier
right,
one day to
right,
being
right.
now father
Now,
of two.
like that.
But his family has been so open and welcoming to me. Me
I like
and
that.
my sister-in-law are like this. I love his dad and stepmom. They're amazing people. they've been so supportive through all of this. It's
Good.
kind of blown my mind because a lot of my family was like, what are you doing? Why? But it was good to have the support on their end because I was like, oh my God, like everyone's gonna judge me. Like I'm being the typical like military stereotype. Like we're getting married so fast. Now we have kids and but they have been incredible. They are the best people that I know, honestly.
I guess the only last question I have, how fun is it turning on the sirens in the ambulance?
Right.
Best feeling in the world, I think. You flip that siren on and then you just get this rush of adrenaline and you're like, oh, now it's go time. I get to drive fast.
What about, I have to add this one in there. What about those drivers that are ignorant, that just don't even get out of the way? How do
That
you feel about that?
So our company, one of my friends actually had a really bad accident, I want to say 2, 3 days ago.
Wow.
He was driving code, and that means driving lights and sirens. And a car pulled out in front of him, and he wrecked the ambulance and flipped it.
Ooh,
And so it can be extremely dangerous.
right.
So anyone who's listening, get out of the way of ambulances, please. It is so
Right.
terrible. It can be so devastating. Thankfully, everyone seems to be pretty much okay, but it could have been so much worse. And there have been a lot of instances where it is a lot worse. That's one of the leading causes of EMS deaths and injuries is crashes.
Because people aren't paying attention.
Yeah. And all it takes is just pull over, just stop what you're doing, stop right there, just don't keep moving, listen,
Right.
look around your surroundings. If you see a bunch of lights flashing, it doesn't mean, oh, I'm just going to pull out really quick. It means
Right. Pull
stop where
over.
you are.
Right.
Was there a passenger in that ambulance that flipped?
Yeah, there's
I
two
always
patients
wondered that.
and a patient in the back.
So what happens? I'm sure you guys have to take so many precautions in a situation like that to differentiate, like, these injuries happen prior and, a
Yeah.
timeline.
Yeah, so before we even get in the ambulance, we pretty much document all of the issues with the patient already and stuff. And then our safety protocols are really, really strict. The patients on the gurneys have about 5 to 6 seat belts securing them in. And then the gurney itself is secured into a whole lock system in the ambulance. So I'm pretty sure that the patient actually was no less worse for wear considering.
Right.
It was the 2 EMTs that were in the back that did have me worried because most of the time you're not seatbelted. You're up and moving around and you can't just sit in a chair and be buckled in all the time. So I was really worried about them mostly because being in the back, having it flipped, you're rolling around basically in a steel cage with so many other things rolling around with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that we're still waiting for the company to really fully put out a statement about it. Unfortunately, no one can tell us anything, including the people involved, because it's against our policy. So we're not allowed to talk about it with anyone. No one can tell us really what happened. We just know that there is a really bad accident and that thankfully everyone walked out of it okay, but we just don't know the extent of it.
I guess thank you for telling us about what it's like to be at EMS, and thank you for telling us about your story. It's I know a lot of people in the comments were mentioning stuff about like people that they are with or know that were in the foster system, and my neighbors have, I think they're up to 7 kids now in the foster system, and they've had to do like a ton of that stuff and very similar situations that you had. So it hits close to home.
Yeah, I have
But
the most respect for everyone who chooses to be foster parents. You guys are amazing. I just kind of fell into this. I wasn't planning on doing it, but people who choose to consciously do that because they want to go out and help kids who have absolutely nothing to do with them is truly amazing. I have all the most respect for them. They are incredible people.